Begin soon. Please be seated and kindly switch your mobile phone to the silent mode. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellency, Ambassador from Austrian, Yang Berbahagia Datin Shalini Ganendra, Director of the SGFA Fine Art and Organizer of the Gallery Weekend Kuala Lumpur, Dr. Herwig Kempinger, Dr. Boehler, our speaker for today, and Ms. Charmin Parameswaran, our moderator. Fellow friends from the private galleries, collectors, art practitioners, art enthusiasts, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the National Art Gallery, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. We appreciate you taking off your busy schedule to join us today, and we hope you will find the program to be fruitful and engaging. It is wonderful to see this focused interest in the development of art. The Gallery Weekend Kuala Lumpur, which is the National Art Gallery, has been a part of from the start, is developing a strong platform for the expression and presentation of the visual culture. Datin Shalini Ganendra himself, who started the initiative, speaks about the GWKL as a community initiative, and thus the GWKL program offers quality, variety, and educational. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to expand our minds and to engage with the two famous curators from Vienna, Dr. Herwig Kempinger and Dr. Boehler, and to ask them questions in this curatorial conversations moderated by Malaysian curator Ms. Charmin Parameswaran. Therefore, to kick off this evening's program, please now I welcome Datin Shalini to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Sheikh Safwan. Welcome to Curatorial Conversations, the first luminary talk of the Gallery Weekend Kuala Lumpur 2017, with Herwig Kempinger, Boehler, and later in discussion with Charmin Parameswaran. Gallery Weekend Kuala Lumpur is about creating an arts platform and program that is accessible to you. It is about reaching out to develop our community and individual appreciation for the arts. Art practice is not just about painting, sculpture, or photography. It is more than that. It includes design, architecture, installation, concepts, curating, and collecting. So the more informed we are about many things, the greater knowledge base we have, and the better we will perform and develop. It is indeed mapping the multidiscipline, which is the Gallery Weekend Kuala Lumpur platform. We thank the National Visual Arts Gallery for hosting this lecture. Thank you to Datuk Najib and Sheikh Safwan and their team for the invaluable support. Very efficient and very thorough. Thank you very much. We thank His Excellency Ambassador Michael Postel for his support, because you've brought two Austrian luminaries here to share their insights on global and local. I will leave for Charmin to introduce our luminaries, but I would like to introduce our local luminary, Charmin Parameswaran, who is a part-time independent curator working in the Malaysian visual arts scene. Her interest is rooted in the potential of collaborative art initiatives to engage wider audiences. Charmin's recent projects include a collaboration with women's rights groups, All Women's Action Society, and before that with the local Obscura Photo Festival. She is also very interested in tracking and engaging with and participating in the development of meaningful collectives. Without much further ado, please welcome Charmin Parameswaran.
Thank you, Shalini, for that introduction. I think before I start, I would like to invite both Herwig and Christine to sort of join me on stage. Welcome everyone to the Gallery Weekend KL 2017 Luminary Pulse Talk, and an especially warm welcome to our speakers, Dr. Herwig Kempinger, as well as Dr. Christine Boehler. I took a look at the website to sort of see what it is the website said we were going to be talking about, and it mentioned the talk would cover clear, simple, and expert insights on how leading curators select work for projects and exhibitions. Which we might or might not touch on today's session, but I think please feel free to raise up any questions that you would have at the end of the presentation, if that's why you're here for. But briefly, both Herwig and Christine will be giving a brief presentation of the work that they do as prominent arts and culture practitioners, working in independent organizations with objectives on progressing our contemporary arts sustainably through a multitude of initiatives. We will leave a Q&A, we will leave about 20 minutes at the end for Q&A, so please feel free to ask your questions later. I think the interaction will be great, especially when we've got both of them here with us. When I was reading up about both Herwig and Christine, I think what really excited me about what they do is actually their multiple roles and contributions to the art industry in their home country of Vienna, something which I think it would be really good to see more of here. Basically, for Dr. Herwig, he's an artist at heart, and he has spent 10 years as a lecturer in the New Media Art at University of Applied Arts, Vienna. And 4 years ago, he was elected the president of Succession, which he will share more on what his work has been. And with Dr. Christine Boehler, she is currently a lecturer of cross-disciplinary strategies at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna. She was the founding director of the culture program of Earth Foundation, which also works in partnership with Transit, a network of autonomous initiatives across Central, East, and Southeast European art, as well as setting up Contact, which collects artworks with a significant role in European art history. Christine will be sharing her experience with Contact, as well as perhaps touching on the importance of collaborations and sustainable planning. I will hand over the floor to Herwig, followed by Christine. And as an opening question, you both wear many hats in the art world. How would you introduce yourself to people when they ask you what do you do?
Hello, good evening. Usually now I introduce myself. I work at the University for Applied Arts. That's very easy and people understand. Yeah. So I see this positively because, as you rightly say, before that I never knew what to say. But usually I'm a curator, I'm working on cultural histories. That's also what I'm really interested in. And I use the means of art to tell narratives. What I also liked a lot about the biennial, which we see here in this building.
Well, and I would introduce myself as an artist that is a temporary head of a very prestigious institution and ready to go back to being an artist in a few years.
Okay, would you want to start with your presentation, Herwig?
So good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. It's a privilege to come to Kuala Lumpur and talk in front of you. And I want to explain you a little bit what we are doing and why we are doing it a little bit different from other institutions. And for that, we have to go back 120 years to the year 1897, when there was one artists association in Vienna called Künstlerhaus. And this was a rather conservative bunch of artists deeply rooted in historicism. And also members were a group of artists around Gustav Klimt that were really angry, you know, because they were never included in the shows, and they were so much more interested in the new art, the Art Nouveau, the art of the turn of the century. So in the year 1897, they decided, okay, we have enough, we leave. And we found our own art association, and they called it Secession. So this building did not exist back then. Their first show they had in a different venue that they rented, and this show was so highly successful in terms of sales and also ticket sales and sales of their artwork that they could pay for the building almost exclusively themselves. And for that, they hired a very young architect. He was 29 years old and has never built a building before. His name was Josef Maria Oltrich. Am I doing something wrong? No, it's not me. No, mine is in silent. I'm not expecting anyone to call me. So anyway, this was a young guy, never built a building before. He was the assistant of Otto Wagner, another famous turn of the century Viennese architect. And he came up with this design, who was rather, and that was rather revolutionary, because it's a building that is quite unique. There is nothing comparable anywhere else, not in Austria or anywhere else. And it was also the time when the Vienna ring, in Vienna the Ring was built, which is this wide street around the inner city, where once the city walls were, they were knocked down, and prestigious representative buildings were built there, the parliament, the city hall, the opera, and so on, and the Viennese nobility built their palais around there. And Secession should also have a lot there and be built there, but when the city council looked at his design, they said, no way are we building this on the Ring, and they gave us a little parcel of land a little further back, and this is where this building is standing now. And it was quite a shock when it was there in 1898. It was built in just 6 months' time. It's hard to believe. I always tell this to architects and construction people to make them blush in anger and shame. And yeah, and this is still the building where we do our exhibitions. This is how it looks at an opening night, for example. And Secession, the Artists Association, from the very beginning was dedicated to bring international art to Austria and not show Austrian art to Austrians, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And that concept was actually so hugely successful that all prominent artists from all over Europe traveled to Vienna, got in contact with a group of artists, and did a show there. So it quickly became one or the most prominent exhibition space in Europe at that time. And it was a very independent institution, of course, and it still is to this day. It's not an institution run by the government, by the state, nor by the city of Vienna. We're still independent. And it was since 120 years until today always run by artists. Meaning artists are showing other artists in mostly 3 shows at the same time. But what I also wanted to tell you that they did something very unique for that time. They changed the interior design for every show. Because according to the artists, they always needed a different architecture, and they also changed the design of the catalog according to the art they were showing. So they were kind of like a little bit the birthplace of the Gesamtkunstwerk, so to say. Also because one of their important approaches was that art should permeate everyday life. Like artists should not only paint, but also design furniture, tapestries, tablecloths, cutlery, porcelain, whatnot. And this became a highly successful concept that lived on for a long time. The Wiener Werkstätte still exists today, but of course nowadays this is a very common concept. So since 120 years, the session is artist run and independent, which is a very charming position to be in, but it also has a disadvantage that we get very little public money. We only get 30% of our budget from public money. The rest we have to come up with ourselves, with ticket sales, with our shop, with private and corporate sponsors. And we manage to do this quite well, because then we can still do whatever we want to do. And the shows, the artists that we are showing, are always selected by a board of artists. We are 12 artists. This is the board of the session. And we decide about the program every year. I changed the process of that a little bit, because in the beginning it was always like this, that everyone yelled a name in the meetings, you know, and then everyone started to Google, because no one knew all the names, and it was like big chaos, and I always thought we should have a little bit more meaningful discussions. So I changed it, and each board member can nominate 2 artists per year for the main space, and 2 artists for the gallery space and the cabinet space that we have. We have 3 different spaces that we always, where we always show 1 different artist. So we show 3 different artists with each exhibition cycle. And these 2 names have to be mailed to all the other board members 1 week before the meeting, and then we just vote democratically in a way. But we also try to balance the shows in a kind of like choreography. So we have male and female artists equally represented, or sometimes, like last year, we had 80% female artists, which is also a good thing, because for a long time there were very little female artists shown. And we also try to represent all media, like painting, sculpture, multimedia, photography, whatever, even sound artists are having shows with us. So because we are having 5 exhibition cycles and 3 spaces, mostly we are showing 3 or 2 artists at the same time. So we are showing between 12 and 15 artists every year, that we fly in twice, because we fly in every artist at least a year in advance of the show, rather earlier, to have a look at the space and to talk a little bit about his concept or her concept, and to discuss what would be possible. And after that, we give the artist really carte blanche, so they can do whatever they want. We hand them over the exhibition budget, so we have no curators. The artists are selected by other artists, which is also quite different from museums, because I think artists deal with art differently than museum directors or museum curators. So the result is usually a different one. We are showing many artists that became really, really famous later at a very early stage when they were not so well known. But we also try to find always a balance between really well-known artists, famous artists that never had a show in Austria, and very young experimental positions. And it's not necessarily so that the more prestigious and older artist always has the main space. Sometimes it's also the other way around. So I want to show you some historical photographs, just a few from the construction. This is the only photo we have when it was still a construction site. Today it looks totally different. The river down there doesn't exist anymore. It's covered. The building in the back doesn't exist anymore. But so you can have a little feeling about what it looked at the time and what kind of a shock it must have been. Why is there nothing? Okay. Yeah. And this is how Vienna looked back then. I mean, if you see the people, the way they are dressed, and compare it with the building in the background, you know, there were still no cars. It was all horse carriages. So this must have been like an alien spaceship landed there. And this was the groups that founded Secession. Sitting here is Gustav Klimt, and the others were the founding members. In the back you had the two workers that helped build the exhibitions, and this was, so to say, the founding photo of the institution. And this is the current board. We try to kind of like recreate a little bit the spirit of the old photograph. These are not all board members because not all were present for the photograph. And I want to show you some of the shows we have done over the years. We still change the interior architecture completely for every artist, always depending on the wishes of the artist. So when I say artists always have carte blanche with us, means that we really literally knock down walls and change doors as long as we can, as it is humanly possible and we can afford it. So this was an artist called Soluit. He's already dead, very prominent American artist. This was the part of the installation he did at Secession, a wall painting, actually. This is another very prominent artist that we showed very early on, Christopher Wool. This is an interesting show, and because the pink furniture, it was a recreation of all the furniture in a Schindler house. It's an architect a very famous architect in Vienna that built a lot in the United States, but it was built all in pink. This is a very young Brazilian artist that we showed, Cynthia Marcel. I liked this show very much as in our small cabinet space, because what she did is she built a plastic curtain and totally sealed off the space, and through a very tiny hole she blew black pigment powder for 1 week continuously into the room, and this is what happened. So the white lines are not painted or anything, it's just how the pigment settled. And what I like about it is, with so simple means, she created something like almost a graphic representation of a space. It became so two-dimensional. This was a group show that another artist, very prominent artist, from a Swiss artist that lives in the United States, Ugo Rondinone, curated for us. We do very few group shows, only like once every 3-4 years, because we really believe in monographic exhibitions. But when we hand over the building to a curator, it's always all the spaces we have. I was really happy with this show because he also included some historical positions and so on. Another painting show that we did that was a real challenge, because she painted until a week before the opening, and she's based in LA, and the paintings were so tall that we couldn't bring them into a regular plane, so we had to hire a cargo plane, and it was like in spring, and it couldn't fly to Vienna because it was too big. It had to land in Luxembourg, and then we had to have an extra big transport to bring them down, but Laura Owens was worth the effort. I was just sitting in Vienna and praying, please, not a pilot strike or whatever, or a hurricane or something, and they arrived 1 day before the opening, and then we had to install them. And this is also one of my favorite shows of all time. It's a very old American artist, Robert Irwin, already over 80, who never had a show in Austria as well. And what he does is he works with very thin fabric, and he creates these screens and spaces. When I was in his show, when I entered one of his shows for the first time, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. If it's like a projection, is it a video? Because you see people walking around in kind of like a fog almost, you know, getting more and more out of focus the further back they are. And then I realized this is actually built in space. One of the more fantastic minimal artists, installation artists that we have nowadays, I think. And yeah, and that was just to give you a brief idea. So if you have questions right now, I'm more than happy to answer. Otherwise, I hand over to Christina.
Are there any questions from the floor at this point in time? Okay, if not, I will start actually. I've got a question. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was curious, you mentioned that when artists present their own work, they tend to present it in a way that's somehow different from how curators and museum directors might present their work. And I wondered, obviously you've shown us some examples of that, but I wondered if you were able to articulate a bit more how that.
No, it's not that they show it differently. I meant that artists probably select other artists at a certain time and moment than museum curators would, you know, because we all 12 of us, we travel a lot, we know a lot of artists all internationally, so you see all the younger artists that don't really have much exposure right at the moment. We are selecting them, like Avery Singer, who we selected like 4 years ago, and who is a total shooting star in the United States right now. Back then, no one knew her. She didn't even have a gallery.
Okay.
That is what I mean.
I'm glad I asked then.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, Herwig, because you mentioned that you've got 12 board members in succession, how do you select these board members, and you know, how do you actually?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, in the beginning, I also had the problems that artists whose work you totally admire are not necessarily artists that you can have a meaningful discussion with. Sometimes it's identical, but sometimes it's not. So it was several criteria. First, I have to have the feeling that they are reasonable people, that you could talk with them. I had to like them also, because you don't want to work with people closely that you dislike, you know. Then I wanted to have all media represented. Then I wanted to have an equal gender proportion. In the end, we also ended up to have more girls than boys. And I also wanted to have all age groups in a way represented, me being the oldest. So I think it's also important that a younger generation comes into play. And also in the beginning, this is also something I forgot to say, when I took over the job, I was a little bit desperate because sometimes in our meetings, my favorites were not selected. And I thought, my God, I know exactly this would be right. And if I could decide alone, it would be so much better, you know. But then in the end, I found out it really means something if 12 artists can agree on one other artist, you know, which is not always easy, I can tell you, you know. And, but we managed so far.
Okay, and do you all work with curators at all, or is it not a consideration?
Yeah, sometimes we invite some. Like this year, we haven't had a group show now, a thematic show, for like 4 years, I think. And for this summer, summer next year, we invited Anthony Uberman from the Waters Institute in Los Angeles.
I quite like that idea of artists inviting the curators to come and join the show. Actually, no further questions. I will pass it on to Christine to take the stage. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello. Okay. I'm wondering how you're doing it with the educational program. Like, maybe there isn't any, but maybe there are tours or guided tours or even workshops. I don't know. So who is responsible for them? Who's doing that?
We have an own person just doing the educational program, who is also partly responsible for touring groups, but we have an own educational program for children, for the elderly, for families, for immigrants, so for whatnot, you know. I hope that helps.
Okay. So they always work closely together with the artist?
For the educational program?
Yes.
No, not necessarily, because the artist is not here anymore when we do that, because usually they are not from Austria. We only have one Austrian artist a year, and so usually a day or two after the opening they fly back again.
No, but I was wondering about the content of the guided tour, of the educational program. If you talk with the artist before,
of course,
because you don't have this objective person like
the
curator.
Of course, extensively, because we also have a press text and so on. We publish for each show also an artist book. So we collaborate with the artist over a pretty long period of time, usually 2 years in advance, and discuss all possible problems and objectives before. So we can really, I think, do that quite professionally. And we also have a visitor guide where we have texts in, I think, 8 different languages about each show. So there's a lot of information flying around.
Okay, I think we'll move it on to Christine. Yeah.
So, hello, good evening or afternoon again. First of all, let me express my gratitude to Shalini for making this possible and for working so hard to have us here, to the Austrian Embassy and our ambassador, Herr Postel, who is here tonight, and of course to the National Gallery for hosting us. Thank you so much, I'm very glad to be here in this international setting. And yeah, wait. So you saw what was there. This is me in my last job in front of an art piece. And just briefly to run through, was already said, but where I come from. As said, I'm now at the university. To start the other way around, I studied humanities, comparative literature, and Romanic languages in Vienna and Madrid. Had quite some stays abroad in New York and also overseas in Hawaii. Did pretty much research on literature and new media in the 90s, literature in public space, which is a complete no-go actually, which was before the internet, so I was pretty much working on hypertext and also installing a line where you can write on via the internet, which existed for a pretty long time. As you see, from 93 till last year, when I had to stop it because the LED technology, as you know, is far more advanced than at that time when I started it. But now, funny enough, when I visited Singapore on my way here, I saw that at NTU there is pretty much the same concept, but done for three-dimensional art pieces at NTU in one of the hallways. So I think good ideas, and I know it is a good idea, live on. In that time, I've been working at the Literature House in Vienna, which is dedicated to German literature of the 20th and 21st century. I directed the reading and exhibition program there. Then I changed over writing this book to Erste Foundation, and I will speak more about that. I pretty much came into from working for an NGO, a non-profit organization, which Literature House was, to commercial or privately funded foundations, which is Erste Foundation. The Erste Foundation is a foundation which owns a bank which is operating in Central and Eastern Europe, which was big, still is, but before the financial crisis, 2008-9, it was really making some good money. So I was the director of the cultural program, and we had great opportunities to spend money and to help artists. And this was a beautiful time. It changed. I changed then as well. This was also the time when I was the director of the collection I will speak about, which we set up, which is still existent. And I changed over to Thyssen-Bornemisza Art Contemporary. They are actually tonight opening an exhibition in Singapore at CCA, NTU. So yeah, this about me, and now I'm at university teaching and researching. I want to tell you, and this is kind of the last text slide you will see, about collecting. Why do we collect? What is collecting? And above all, if you collect, I think it's good to know at least why. Maybe it's not so much the question of the what, but your energy, your vision, your reason to go. I think, and maybe to describe what story you want to tell is something quite important. I will try to maybe also to give you my idea about collecting and telling stories out of collections and funding work, and how to maybe make it sustainable, which usually is the big question which the funders ask the artist. So, one more text slide. The good thing and the very interesting and magical thing about collections is they are not extinguished while we consume them, right? You eat a donut, the donut is away. You cannot extinguish the collectible while you look at it. It just adds up to its own story. And this is also the thing that the whole narrative which is inscribed in an art piece or in a stamp or in a cup or in a chair, whatever you collect, you have something which drives you. I think this is very much, and I see at least one here, that you have this kind of magic will to tell a story. So let's get back to art. Probably all of you followed that. We have a blue chip market here, and we have some Guggenheims around, and we really have driving forces if we talk about art. So this is one of the pieces which was sold most expensively just a couple of weeks ago. And we all know it's now probably traveling to Dubai to be in the Guggenheim there. I think the price development is also quite visible. And what is really important to me is also that Leonardo da Vinci painted this not for a church. It's a religious painting, but it has not been painted for a church, but it has been painted for the King of France. And just to make a very brief step into art history, what really kind of also, if you talk about making worlds and how techniques also make worlds, going back to the 13th century in Europe, this has been painted in Italy by Zimbabwe, and you see here kind of the flat moment of the painting. This is before the central perspective in European painting came into being. And he's one of the ones, they say, he's the teacher of Giotto, which is the next painting you see. And you also see the difference how central perspective came into painting in the European Renaissance. And the interesting moment in the social story around that is that from this moment, from these centuries on, the painters, the artists were not painting for the church as they did in Europe before, But they started to paint for the kings and queens and the kind of national representative. So you see it pretty good here, I think. In this style of painting, it's still that you see those are the servants. They are small. So the pictorial representation is following the importance of the people. The bigger you are, it's not the central perspective, but it's kind of to show how important. So this is kind of the other way of bringing over a story, right? This is now the 20th century. This is from Mladen Stilinovic, a Croatian artist who in 1992, which is right at the moment when the Yugoslavian wars ended. And the market opened to the artists, the West European market, or the American opened to the other. He made that because, of course, if you cannot relate to the market, if you cannot relate to other artists, you are kind of not an artist, as he states very briefly and, of course, provocative. Mladen Stilinovic is already one artist of this collection which I mentioned, the Contact collection, which was put together by all the members of this banking group. They had to pay in, and I want to run briefly through that slide thing with you, because we have some maybe parallel histories, maybe here and in Eastern Europe, as we have everywhere. And how can you set up a collection? There are 100 ways. You can do it like, I now collect all the microphones of the world and nobody will ever judge me if this is good or bad. Maybe if you want to be sustainable or if you want to reach out to others and involve communities, you might think about some other means. So this is a Slovakian artist, Julius Koller. The whole collection is cruising around politics, about war. It's a lot about gender stories. It is about art history and about public space and also exhibition space. If we look at Eastern European markets and also if we look at the Austrian market, artist scene in the 60s, you don't have a lot of opportunities to exhibit, to be present, to sell your things. The art market was completely different. As think about Leonardo, what it was 40 years ago and how it was sold now. And so those are the themes which are implicit in the pieces which are collected, but which are also then, which you can read through the story. What I think for this collection is kind of crucial, there's a committee, there's a jury making proposal to the collection owners and the director, which is Silvia Eibelmeier, Austrian curator, Georg Schöllhammer, Austrian as well, Jerzy Ševčík, Czech Republic curator, Branka Stipančić, art historian from Zagreb, and Adam Simčík from Poland, now famous because he was the last Documenta curator. And all of them, and this is also important, they don't change each 2 years. They have been there for the whole time. You can make a concept out of it if you work with an advisory board to change them yearly, but of course if you make a consistent discussion with them over years, things turn out differently. So for the moment of performative actions and art in public space, this is still one of my favorite pieces by Pavel Althammer, done 1995, in an action where he walked through, through this city, which I cannot pronounce really, and whatever he saw in front is back on this television thing, and in the end he put it in the museum and you could watch the video there. You have to imagine Eastern European cities in Poland in '95, it was quite a moment to do so. This has also to do, this art in public space and this moment of closed society, you see pretty good with Ion Grigorescu, a Romanian artist who took the Electoral Meeting photograph series in 1975, where he had the Ceausescu meetings, and sometimes you see, as here, the Securitate people. Securitate was the secret police of Ceausescu, which was a very undemocratic nationalistic system. So what is kind of crucial is there were no spaces, no art history written, no collections, and no market. And this is kind of talking about society, talking about war. Also one of the pictures which maybe you saw, this was quite frequently shown. It's by Seja Kamaric, a Bosnian artist. And this writing which you see was written on a barrack where a lot of genocide happened in Srebrenica during the Yugoslav wars. So the soldiers which were there and the Dutch soldiers were pretty much involved in this scandal. A lot of rape and murder happened there. And this was written on the barracks. And this in the back is what she put behind it, and it's a photograph of herself. She made a poster campaign in Sarajevo to the anniversary of this genocide action and put these posters up. If you go to the barracks in Sarajevo, you still have this writing there. It's super small. So what she did is she took the photograph and put it on the street and brought people to talk to each other. It's pretty much shown around, actually. Still. So. This again about public space, but also the not having spaces to show art. It's from Tibor Hayas, done in '76 in Hungary, in Budapest. He asked people to pose for him in front of on a public space, and he put this text over it. It's a video work, about half an hour long. In the beginning, you see the people standing in front and having this text like represent the lifestyle, be pretty, be whatever. And then he cuts the background away, puts it like in a studio to kind of show, media can really change the image. We all know that by now. At that time, it was kind of a representation of something very new. Jerzy Kowanda, one of the most shown pieces, most traveling pieces of the collection. He was on the Prague Wenzel Square, which is a pretty important square dot, main square, standing against the audiences, as well here as the escalator. And to come back to Austria, where I said also people in Austria, so we always have these parallel histories, and looking at the exhibition there, or here in this house, it's a lot of things happen at the same time globally, even if you don't know how things are connected, especially in the 60s and 70s. This is Vali Export, one of the major female artists of the Austrian older generation, doing her body performances. And this is from Peter Weibel, also a thing where you kind of performatively, while you walk on this writing, which says trampling on the law, written on the floor is trampling on the law. So while you walk through and you have to install it in a pathway, you trample on the law. So you cannot really avoid to trample on the law. So it's kind of a, This about non-existing art history. The East Art Map, done by a group of artists, Irwin, which again refers to how will we know who we are? Are there artists? Who other artists are there? And how are we relating to each other? I make a big jump now. Also because the collection I just talked about doesn't have a house. A house costs a lot of money, it's a big decision, You have to settle down, and especially in the 2000s, it was not so much about having a representative museum where you can show your art. This changed, especially then in the 2000s, 2010s. Just to show you the European big houses of the big foundations, there are plenty more. But like Prada Foundation has 2 houses, one in Milano, one in Venice. They always kind of have this moment of heavy, nice, good architecture. Very international and famous architects. This is an older house. This is the one in Venice. Then, for instance, we have the Louis Vuitton Foundation with a house in Paris. They will open another one in Paris as well. And we have the commercial contradiction, the concurrency, the François Pinault Foundation in Venice. I took this picture because you see the relation of, it's somehow, this is, for me at least, this is kind of pointing to blue chip, the new market, the new art market, how big are, how shiny you are. That's their second venue in Venice. This one is the second venue in Venice. Right here is Marktplatz, Plaza San Marco, and they are going to open one more in Paris now. And you know, it's about being highly representative, and it's of course also good art, but kind of following international market rules. And this has a lot to do, for sure, with the financial crisis and art as investment. So, you know, there are so many ways to go. This is why I earlier said, decide where you want to go. Where's your heart at? If it is an investment and you want to save your money and you want to buy art, maybe look for a good dealer who has good taste or who can support you well. Otherwise, go for cups. This is Luma Foundation by one woman, Maya Hoffmann. She is the hire of Hoffmann La Roche, the Swiss chemistry production. She has a huge fabric in southern France, and she has artistic consultants. She has been working with them for many years. And just to point back to the art market, all of them are, of course, all of their consultants, and that's usually how it has to be, are, of course, involved in very many different other exhibition houses and have their jobs. One scandal which happened recently in the art field was that Beatrix Roof, who was the director of Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, this is Stedelijk, she resigned because she had her own company, a consulting company, where she worked with various people like Maya Hoffmann. She had to step back because she got so much money and she didn't tell the museum. And of course, then you ask, okay, I have a private collection, which I fund privately, which is my own things. I have a public museum which shows the things and which gives prices, which is on jewelry. So is this fair? Because of course the market and the private is kind of interfering. Just some gossip on the side. I make a small jump to kind of more the region we are in now, to come to the end. Samdani Art Foundation, some of you might know. Also because Pavel Althammer, I bring it back because they are again and again popping up as private funders in the region who are, at least from my European small perspective, doing interesting work. They are also opening up a big museum now planned in Bangladesh. And this is again Pavel Althammer, the one we saw earlier with the astronaut. He did a cooperative project with people there. Another very interesting foundation I want to point you to is the Asia Art Archive, which is mainly based in Hong Kong. And they do really great research work, give library, have papers of all kinds, and educational programs. What I think is very important in addition to collecting. If you collect and put it in storage, it's dead. It's not existent. A collection is only visible if you work with it. And working means research, means publishing, means doing talks, making exhibition, bringing things together, putting them into relation, because then you have a story. Then you can say, oh, this is bad, this is good, what is it? So, you know, move people. And for that, showing collections, super briefly, Gender Check was one exhibition I directed a couple of years ago. It was on art from Eastern Europe, focusing on gender roles. So it was not art from female painters or artists, but it was on art which is representing gender models in the given societies. We had some time and money at that time, which was good. So we had quite some years to do research. So as said, we had 25 researchers in 24 countries, and they brought together endless amount of input. There's now a big catalog. There's a quite big reader, and we did this exhibition. This is a picture from the 50s, which really shows the socialist roles. How the socialist society saw kind of man and woman. What's nice about this picture, she has Coca-Cola written on her thing here. So this is, of course, the working couple in front of the Ceausescu Palace, actually, and this is then the Bad West. Transit has been mentioned, and talking about sustainability and how can a local scene maybe be helped to come into talking, to learn, to have kind of a direct moment. So Transit is a network of organizations where I'm still part of in Bratislava, Budapest, Prague, Vienna, Bucharest, Cluj, Iași, and Sibiu. So also again in this region where I'm from, or where I'm at least living, and it's always own local NGO running it with kind of how they put their program together, and they work together, but they also work singularly. And they do quite small-scale work. It's really involving communities. How can you bring people together? Vít Havranek was the Prague one was a co-curator of Jakarta Biennale. So again, to come to the end, if you are whatever you are, listen to people, and don't have your own story already running and your own answers, but try to listen, and if you don't understand, ask. And then give trust and time, and somehow stay outside but are able to step in. That's at least growing in age. That's what I learned. That's what I at least want to follow. And we skip that. And I thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for that quick run-through. I think there was quite a lot there for us to sort of process as well. Any questions on what you've seen? Any clarifications? Yes, Shalini. Yeah.
Develop it. Did everyone hear the question?
I think just repeat it.
Christine, what was your collecting and curatorial discipline and selection process of works when you worked for these, when you work with these various collections and foundations?
Well, the discipline I have to think about. What we did was really, I traveled a lot. I met a lot of people, and the beautiful thing is if you're in the art field and probably any other field, wherever you go, you get one person, you immediately get introduced to like 100. So it was a lot in the research phase when we started the foundation, where I was part of. It was to talk to the people, to listen to them, and to bring lines together. You know, certain names pop up more than once. So it was clear what we found out and what I was very interested in, that there is no pattern there is no art history written of that time, at least in Eastern European art, not excluded Austria, but also kind of included Austria. There are always various history writings. There's the national one, kind of on the governmental level, and there are usually a lot of narratives which grow under that, down to, especially in the former socialist countries, as they didn't have public spaces to, gallery scenes, a lot happened in the kitchens. They met in the kitchens and exchanged and did their art exhibitions kind of there till the very present, or so it was, and of course also all political schemes were represented in these artistic scenes, which were not on the state level. I don't know if I make myself clear. So for me it was very interesting to get all these moments of narration and bring them somehow to public too. But this meant that I implemented for both the foundation and the collection a board which helped to make a broader picture. Because also I don't believe in this singularity of one person, that I would be able to find out of such a big and rich region with 23 different languages, at least if you have 23 different countries, what happened there. So trying to make it broad, and then involving a lot of people by giving them help or support, not help, but support, and collecting the input and bringing them together. We did a lot of meetings,
When you say you supporting artists through patronage and funding, is that right? Or commissioning projects?
Yes, both.
Supporting them
both.
that way?
There were projects initiated, like Transit and various others, or this gender check exhibition, which then traveled. But it was also to find out what are local NGOs and NPOs who work with artists, who run small spaces, have galleries, and to give them support so that they work with the local communities. Because I wouldn't travel to Romania each second week, and I cannot be present there, because you need the local communities involved to really grow something. So, and this seed money, as you can call it, it's usually not a lot.
But they know how to spend it well, and it probably goes very far. So that's, they really appreciate it. Yeah. Well
and this
done.
was the first part of the research, that you find out which people are kind of key figures and which are well connected without being in a dictatorial state, but just where people give trust to.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Christine? Okay, I think I have a question. And it's actually back to my interest in terms of growing audiences for the arts, which I think is very important. The Contact Art Collection, I read, was actually available on loan for context-specific exhibition. Does that mean that art communities or the public could actually go to the foundation and sort of curate their own art shows and bring it out? Or
well, not as easy as that, but usually the art field, as this is a collection which of course has a certain value, and the value is growing. There are all those things which are implied to art pieces. Once they are in a collection, they are insured, They are stored in a certain way. We had a piece of a Polish artist which was then shown in Documenta. And in that moment, I remember the curator usually standing in front of me saying, please, I need to make this trip. I have to go to, I don't know. And I said, oh, it's the eggs again, because the eggs are this piece, it's very fragile. So it means once it has to travel, you have to send a curator with it. The concept was to talk to usually bigger institutions, because it's big pieces partly as well. If they would accept the show, if they would accept the cooperation, and then you work with the curators of the other institutions and bring it there. Or what you have also for all collections, at least the collections I've been working with, you have somebody calling from, I don't know where, could be from this institution here, saying, we do a show on Eastern Europe or on, relations between. We would need this piece, can we borrow it? That's usually how it works. And then you have the traveling costs. Sometimes somebody has to go with it. Sometimes it's easy because you just send a picture over. So this is more on an institutional level, but this is ongoing.
Right. And I think back to Herwig as well. I think because you've seen Succession, you plan your own shows and all that. How successful have you been in attracting audiences, given that you've got your own artist shows and you do about 15 shows a year?
Right, that's correct. Yeah, and honestly, I mean, it's quite remarkable for a contemporary art institution. We have about 120,000 paying visitors a year. So, and with opening guests and other free admissions, we come to about 150,000 a year. That makes like 30,000 visitors per show, which for a small country like Austria is like a lot. And on top of that, we don't have a PR budget. So we had a little PR budget when I took over, but it was so little that you couldn't use it in a meaningful way that had any impact. So I decided to add it to the exhibition budget. So we rely exclusively on the word of mouth. We have no posters, nothing.
Okay. Any additional questions that we have? Because I think we've got about 10 minutes.
Yes, it's also something that I established that didn't exist before.
Right. Okay.
But as I'm not having social media myself, I have my press lady take care of that.
Okay.
Yeah, but actually we do. Yeah, we have Facebook and we have Twitter and we have
Instagram.
Instagram, exactly.
And presumably
yeah,
that...
also Instagram we try to make a little bit more attractive in that we always give it over to one artist for like 10 days. So if you have 3 artists for one cycle, each holds it for like 10 days. And it's really interesting because a lot of people that usually follow us leave us in this period, but we get many more followers because of the artists, But the other ones come back once the art section is over. It's really strange,
Yeah, sorry.
Herwig, you mentioned that you, I think, get 30% of your funding from the government, which you said was quite low. I know for other organizations that would be quite high. And I would really love to hear between the two of you the European perspective on the relationship between public and private funding of art, keeping in mind, Christine, that you showed all of those photographs of the big name foundations often funded through family money or money derived from corporate profit. So I'd love to hear more about your experiences.
Well, I can say that we used to be kind of partners while I worked for Erste Foundation and for the bank, because the bank is, for instance, the biggest sponsor of, right, is it still? Of Secession. So this is also, I'm quite related to Secession because it was kind of my part to take care for this project as well. And
so my opinion is completely compromised.
yes, but I'm not at the bank anymore, so that's fine. it is indeed not easy, and I showed these pictures very consciously to point your attention to the kind of the beauty of these houses, the high representation of these houses. And I went with my former boss to the fundraising dinner in Basel once, which is one of the most important ones. And after that, we went for a cocktail, and it was kind of I was able to enter kind of the scene because I was with this person. And funny enough, the people I talked to, and weren't very many, but still, all of them wanted to open up a museum. But this was Basel, so it was really rich, and of course, it's completely okay to open up a museum. But as it was asked earlier, like where's education, where's the mediation of the program? Of course, there are no rules in neoliberal society. There is no rule what a private funder has to do. And that's, I guess, why I said earlier, if there are any funders or collectors in the room, you know, I think it's super fair to do it for your own. But as this relation between private and public is so much changing, and the private is so much taking over, it should be quite clear what people are doing. Or, you know, it's not easy because the private funders, of course, tend to act like a national government. And I don't say that all national governments are kind of the best. Also, politics are not very, you know. I don't know. Do you have anything to contribute to that?
That politics is not always the best? Or?
No, the private and the public.
Well, private fundraising is hard work, especially in Austria, where taxes are high and social insurance is extremely high. So after you have paid your taxes, you are still, which is like if you are earning quite a lot of money, is 50%, and whatever tax leaves you, social insurance takes 25%. So you're basically left with 25%. So to get people to understand that they, from this 25%, also if it's still a serious amount of money, they should still contribute to something that is publicly accessible, is hard. You know, you have to like really, really work your butt off. And it's fundraising nowadays is like 90% of my work. So what my experience is that it never works if you go to someone and tell them, listen, we are so cool, give us your money. You know, why? You know? So you really have to work on them for sometimes a year, invite them, tour them, make them understand how the institution is organized and why is it interesting or good or whatever. And then once they really got it and are interested, and you kind of bound them to your institutions, then you can ask them for money, and then it usually works.
And we've got one, I think we've got time for one last question, right at the back. Do we have a mic? Yeah.
I thought I heard something about funding from the public sector to the tune of 30%.
Yeah.
So you can hear me, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Loud and clearly.
No, I don't need the mic. So my question is that percentage for visual art or for the arts generally? And secondly, is it for particular entities or for all societal institutions involved in promotion of the arts?
No, it's usually much higher, but we are an independent institution. We are not run by the government, by the state, or by the city. So that is why we get so little, you know. Usually it's the other way around. Usually it's like 70% government money, public money, and 30% private sponsoring.
You say that you get 30% funding, and you consider that to be little.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. How is it here? How much funding do you get? Is anybody here who can answer that?
I
Can you?
Shamin probably knows.
No, I don't think we actually have a fixed sort of percentage for funding, and I think the question of funding and actually getting funding has only just started. We don't have any infrastructure on that. So I think when you bring up numbers like 30%, 70%, we don't even have a gauge in Malaysia as to whether it's a lot or not. Right? I mean, yeah.
But just that's not automatic, is it? You have to fight for that 30%.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Justify it. So it's the same.
Yeah, which is...
It's not some set figure.
No.
Yeah.
And when we had this right-wing government in the 2000s, some artists did things that they didn't like, so they cut us in half. So you immediately get punished. But then you have to find someone else who compensates for that.
Yeah.
But one has to say that Austria still has a high tradition of state funding, which comes from the Austrian democratic history kind of and socialistic moment. So one really has to say that even if, yes, you have to fight for it, most of the state money goes for the big houses in Austria, like the state opera, the theaters. So, you know, they eat like, I don't know, 80% of the budget or 90%, something like that. But still what happens is that the how would you call it, the grassroots scene, the free artists moving around, if you have association, you can get funding. It's really tiring. I did it myself when I was super young and not knowing what I'm up to. That's usually when you start and then you find out, oh my God, but it worked and I received money and I could do things. And this, I have to say, I hope it stays like that. But of course it changed, and I guess this come back to this bigger foundations I showed. It's also that, yes, I think the market is really changing a lot, you know, from the quiet collecting and the quiet artist somewhere in a gallery. We are now in a booming market, and whenever you talk about art, it's like blue chip is like the second sentence that it's entered, and this is interesting, but it's different to what moves me to be with art. You know, so, yeah. And this is about private and public as well.
Yeah, but still what you said, fine arts is comparatively little funded compared to music, theater, and opera and so on. You know, this is the majority because Vienna and Austria, first of all, really see their identity into music and theater.
And on that note, I think we actually have to end the talk. And I think it's quite an opportune time for this talk as well, because I think there are rumblings from the ground in Malaysia, as well as opportunities for funding that are starting to come up. And I think both, as Herwig and Christine has pointed out, we just need to know where we're moving to in terms of our arts. And I really hope that we can start moving there as well. All right, thank you very much for being with us today. And thank you everyone for coming. I think both Herwig and Christine will be around after this. So I want to thank the speakers, also thank to Balai. And I think the slide has been up for a while. Please join us tomorrow at the Islamic Art Museum at 3 p.m., where Dr. Hugo Wei and Sarah Ichioka will be having a conversation on creating and collecting. Thanks, Shalini, for Gallery Walk KL, and have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Herwig and Dr. Christine, for the insightful presentation. So I would like to invite our speaker for the photo session and token appreciation award. So I would like to invite Madam Intan Hafiza, the representative from the head of support program of the KL Biennial, to hand over the token of appreciation to Dr. Kempinger, Dr. Herwig, Dr. Christine, Ms. Charmaine, and also Dr. Shalini.
And then you find out, oh my God, but it worked and I received money and I could do things. And this, I have to say, I hope it stays like that. But of course it changed, and I guess this come back to this bigger foundations I showed. It's also that, yes, I think the market is really changing a lot, you know, from the quiet collecting and the quiet artist somewhere in a gallery. We are now in a booming market, and whenever you talk about art, it's like blue chip is like the second sentence that it's entered, and this is interesting, but it's different to what moves me to be with art. So, yeah. And this is about private and public as well.
Yeah, but still what you said, fine arts is comparatively little funded compared to music, theater, and opera and so on. This is the majority because Vienna and Austria, first of all, really see their identity into music and theater.
And on that note, I think we actually have to end the talk. And I think it's quite an opportune time for this talk as well, because I think there are rumblings from the ground in Malaysia, as well as opportunities for funding that are starting to come up. And I think both, as Herwig and Christine has pointed out, we just need to know where we're moving to in terms of our arts. And I really hope that we can start moving there as well. All right, thank you very much for being with us today. And thank you everyone for coming. I think both Herwig and Christine will be around after this. So I want to thank the speakers, also thank to Balai. And I think the slide has been up for a while. Please join us tomorrow at the Islamic Art Museum at 3 p.m., where Dr. Hugo Wei and Sarah Ichioka will be having a conversation on creating and collecting. Thanks, Shalini, for Gallery Walk KL, and have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Herwig and Dr. Christine, for the insightful presentation. So I would like to invite our speaker for the photo session and token appreciation award. So I would like to invite Madam Intan Hafiza, the representative from the head of support program of the KL Biennial, to hand over the token of appreciation to Dr. Kempinger, Dr. Herwig, Dr. Christine, Ms. Charmaine, and also Dr. Shalini.